Hello, and welcome to Final Fantasy Series Retrospective. Well, like I said in my Dragon Quest series, I got into RPGs with the first Dragon Warrior game in the fall 1989. A little less than a year later, summer 1990, a trip to the video store, seeing that box art for the first Final Fantasy game, picking it up and looking at the screen caps in the back of gameplay and thinking, hey, this kind of looks like Dragon Warrior. So, rented it, started playing it, and of course this is a file I made quite a while ago when I still played this original version of the game, back when I had the habit of naming my characters after rock stars I was a fan of, either at the time or still unto this day. In this case, Mark Slaughter, Dana Strum, Blas Elias, and Tim Kelly, the four members of the 80s, early 90s hard rock band Slaughter, whom I was heavily into. I mean, I still am today, but especially back then. Whenever I played this game, I turned the sound down and listening to their then only existing album, their debut, Stickin' To Ya. But anyways, that's another story for another time, because I did that a lot back in those days. But anyways, the first Final Fantasy game. What can I say that I haven't already said in my GBA playthrough of it? Or my playthrough, let me rephrase that. In my playthrough of the GBA remake of it. A lot of nostalgia for this original version of the game, but good God is it buggy. So many of the spells don't work. Special weapons like the Coral Sword don't work like they're supposed to. And yeah, final glitch fantasy, it doesn't work like it's supposed to, could have been the full working title of this game. Granted, if the urban legends are true, Squaresoft was nearly bankrupt when they made this game, so they didn't have a whole lot of development staff to put into it, or money to put into the development of it, so what you get is a shoddy game because of that. So that, if that's true, they kind of get a pass on it, but still, if you're going to play this game, unless you're truly nostalgic, even more than I am, I would recommend any one of the more recent remakes, Game Boy Advance, PSP, or Pixel Remaster, where all of the bugs have been fixed and glitches ironed out, so to speak. Yeah. But again, it was a nice starting point, and I do like this original, just I don't think I'd ever play it, at least especially not for a YouTube playthrough. Of course, by the time this game hit North America in the summer of 1990, Japanese gamers had already got this game, Final Fantasy II, in 1988. I mean, the first game was released in Japan in December of 1987, this one in December of 1988 on the NES, or Famicom as it was called in Japan. Okay, what's wrong with my controller? What? What happened to my save file? Uh-oh. Shoot. Hold on. Okay. Oh. Not as buggy as the first game was in its original form, but... And this one does have some interesting mechanics that unfortunately were never utilized in any RPG, not just Final Fantasy, but any RPG I've ever played. Like magic spells, magic points, the level of the spell, level 1 spells 1 point, level 2 spells 2 points, level 3 spells 3 points, so forth and so on. So, yeah, that's kind of a cool mechanic that I wish more RPGs would have utilized, but or you only get experience in weapon like swords if you're using swords, or you only get experience in magic if you're you're using magic, Why would you get experience in sword play if you're not using swords? It kind of makes sense. Stuff like that I wish they'd use, that they'd added to other RPGs, but as far as I know, this is the only one. Granted, it's not like I've played every game ever made. And I technically, since the whole idea of these videos is to talk about the games as they came out in America, and this game didn't come out in North America until the PS1 remake at the opposite end of the 90s. Yeah. This NES original, to this day, as I make this video now, has never been released in America. Not even on a virtual console, not even on a collection. Just like Dragon Quest V or Dragon Quest VI Super Nintendo original. The only way you're going to play this game in its original form, get yourself an emulator. Yeah. Another one of those games. I didn't play this game until, 2001, 2002, when I did just that. Get myself a computer and an emulator. Same thing can be said for the next game in Japan. Final Fantasy III, also on the NES or Famicom, in Japan only. Yeah. Released there in April of 1990, just a few months before the first game came out in North America. Of course, this one, yeah, same party member makeup that I had in my GBA playthrough of the first Final Fantasy game earlier this year. Cloud, the soldier, March, the red mage, Locke, the white mage, and Cecil, the black mage. Yeah. The original version of this game is okay, but if you're going to play this one, I'd recommend one of the remakes, either the Game Boy Advance or the PSP if there was one. I'm not sure if there was a PSP or PSP. Yeah. Anyways, yeah, of course, this is the... Yeah. This one. Granted, Part 2 was never released here at the time either, but Part 2 did eventually get a PS1 remake along with Part 1 as Final Fantasy Origins. A few years to a half a decade later, got a Game Boy Advance remake on its, Final Fantasy 1 and 2 Dawn of Souls. Same can be said, Final Fantasy 4 got a remake or a remaster along with Chrono Trigger as Final Fantasy Origins, or Chronicles rather. Final Fantasy 5 and 6 got a PS1 remake called Final Fantasy Anthology. And all of them, 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6, all got Game Boy Advance remakes or remastered ports. This one never did on either count. This game never got an American release until the DS remake in 2006. 16 years after its initial release. For a long time, it seemed like this game was never going to get released, And to this day, the original NES version never has. Again, like Dragon Quest V, Dragon Quest VI, Final Fantasy II. If you want to play the original version of this game, get yourself an emulator. And yet you're not supposed to do that. Yeah, middle fingers to you. You don't want us to use emulators and release these original versions of the games. Not just some remake. Granted, in this game's case, the remake is better, yes. But still, for those of us who are truly nostalgic and want to see the original forms of these games, yeah. Anyways, of course, this would be the last Final Fantasy game on the NES. Even in Japan, by the time the next one was released, Nintendo released its Super Famicom, or Super Nintendo here in the States. Alright. Well, what comes next has been a subject of debate for 30 years now. Is Part 1 wasn't released here until 1990. By then, as I was just talking about, Japanese gamers already had parts 2 and 3, and Squaresoft was already in the early development of the next Final Fantasy game to be made for the Super Nintendo. Released in Japan in the first half of 1991. Final Fantasy IV. But for whatever, to avoid confusion, it was released as Final Fantasy II here in America. Yeah. Now, before I go into my opinions on this quote-unquote game, quote-unquote, I think it's kind of funny that, I kind of get, like I've said before in other videos, I kind of get where they were going with that. The Super Nintendo was just out. They wanted the next Final Fantasy game to be for it. Software and hardware companies still do that to this day. Look at, well, not to this day necessarily, but just 5 short years ago, Breath of the Wild was originally supposed to be on the Wii U, which it was, but the release of it was held off so they could make it a launch title for the Switch. So, yeah, that part of it is kind of understandable. But why did they have to rename it Part 2? Why couldn't they just left Part 4? And why weren't the NES versions of the real 2 and 3 ever released here? Yeah, again, like I was just saying, they wanted, to have the next new game on the... But they were still making NES games well into 1994. 3 years after this came out, this mess of a game came out 3 years later. Plenty of time for them to go back and release the real parts 2 and 3 and leave this as part 4. All questions that I'm sure if they had to do, all things that if they had to do over again, I'm sure they probably would have done just that. I'm sure they regret, yeah. But anyway, as for this quote-unquote game, well, like my review and my thoughts on Twilight Princess for Zelda fans, Final Fantasy fans are probably going to hate me, because this is my least favorite of the Final Fantasy games, at least of the first, decade of the series history in North America. Where to begin with this so-called game? On the positive side, it does have a good soundtrack. Baron Castle, this overworld theme, and a few other tracks. So it does have a good soundtrack. Of course, I didn't notice that at the time. Like I was just saying, I had the habit of turning down the sound on the TV and listening to whatever rock music album I was into at that point in time. And that would be my gameplay for the music, or my music for the gameplay, rather. Like I talked about in my Dragon Quest VIII video, or Dragon Quest retrospective video about Dragon Quest VIII's 3DS soundtrack issues. It wasn't until Ocarina of Time that I actually started listening to video game music as I played the game. Yeah. And to be perfectly fair, this one does have a pretty good story, but I never got into video games for their story, or refused to because of lack of story. Come on. As I've been pointing out in this whole series of videos, if I was going to refuse to play a video game because it didn't have a good story, I would have never got into video games in the first place. Pac-Man, what's the story what's the story in that game? Mario didn't really have much of a story. Bowser trying to take over the Mushroom Kingdom. Go stop him, hero boy. Zelda. Ganon trying to take over Hyrule. Go stop him, hero boy. Yeah. If I was going to get into video games for their story, or not get into video games because they didn't have a good story, I would have never got into video games in the first place. So yeah, that's why I kind of chuckle inwardly, and chuckle riotously loud inwardly when I hear people saying how they hate a game because it didn't have a good story. Yeah. Again, like all of my opinions in these videos, if you disagree, your right to your opinion, but my right to disagree with your opinion. to each their own. But yeah. Well, this game does have a decent story. Story alone is not enough to make me want to play the game. Now with Edward the Bard. Now with Edge the Ninja. And while I said this game does have a good story, it's also kind of laughable how, oh, character is dead. Oh, how tragic. Oh, wait a minute, he's not dead. He's back again 20 minutes later. Well, mate, yeah, you get the idea. He didn't die, he just passed out. Yeah, kind of cheap. But yeah, I don't know. I might go back and replay it again. I mean, like I said in my Dragon Quest video series, if I made that series retrospective of Dragon Quest, even just 3 months ago, I'd pretty much be slamming Dragon Warrior 2 as heavily as I'm slamming this game now. So maybe all I need to just, do is go back and play the game again. So yeah, just point being, if you're a fan of this game, don't mind me. I just, as of right now, don't have much to say positively about this game. The next game, in Japan anyways, definitely. This one, not so much so. Yeah. In September, or actually in December 1992, on the Super Famicom in Japan only, came Final Fantasy V. Granted, this game didn't come out in North America until 1999, 7 years later, on the Sony PlayStation, remake, remaster port of the game. But once it did, and I played the game, oh boy, was I cursing up a blue streak. Oh sure, you take 7 years to release this game. You give us Final Fantasy IV right away, but you take 7 years to release this game. Screw you, Nintendo of America. You give us the turd. Well, wait for an eternity to release the golden game, or stuff like that. So that's what you think of us, huh, Nintendo of America? You give us the toilet bowl encrusted Final Fantasy IV. Well, you get the idea. And again, I'm sorry if anybody watching this video actually likes Final Fantasy IV, to each their own, but I do not share that sentiment. This game, on the other hand, oh yeah. My second favorite of the Final Fantasy series. Granted, again, I didn't play it when it was first released. No one in America did. Not until 1999 when the Sony PlayStation Remaster Remake port came out, along with Final Fantasy VI as Final Fantasy Anthology. Of course, many people who played that to this day still have bad memories of slow load times and bad translation, like Ferris, atrocious pirate dialogue. Yeah, or one of the characters' real names being Salsa. I mean, it may be nostalgia, being the first official American release of the game, but I do have a little bit of it for the PS1 version of Final Fantasy V. But when I do a playthrough of the game for my channel, it'll probably be the GBA remake, to go along with Part 1 and Part 6 eventually, and Part 2. But again, yeah, I really don't have a whole lot to say about this game because it wasn't released at the time. Which kind of sucks because it was a really good game. I don't know why this one wasn't released here. I mean, I can only guess it had something to do with the job classes, as this one kind of is like Dragon Warrior 3 in that regard, changeable job classes. Only here, you don't have to have the party member up to level 20 to change job classes. You don't lose half of your stats, at least not that I noticed. So the job class system is a little better in this game than it was in Dragon Warrior 3. But I'm just guessing. I don't know why this game wasn't released here in North America for 7 long years. But Final Fantasy IV, what? If you can figure that crap out, good luck. They give us Final Fantasy IV, but not this game. What? Anyway, enough said on that. The next Final Fantasy game would be the last on the Super Nintendo. Released in 1994. Final Fantasy III. Wait a minute. And here I was just saying Final Fantasy III wasn't released here until... Yeah, never mind. That joke doesn't work. It was supposed to be Final Fantasy VI, but to avoid confusion, was released as Final Fantasy III. Yeah. Not the same Final Fantasy III that was on the NES or Famicom. No. Just Nintendo of America screwing up the chronology order again. Which nobody here in America had any indication that was the case. Unless you had connection to Japanese media somehow. As far as we knew, it was Final Fantasy III. Since the real Part 2 and 3 weren't released here yet, neither was Final Fantasy V. So And Nintendo of America was able to keep their little secret for another few more years yet. Anyways, more about that later. For now, as for this game, great game. Yeah, of course that file there, I cheated my rump roast off with Game Genie codes. That's why I would never show that on a public video. Yeah. Level 99. Trust me, I did not get there legitimately. Cheated my little rope roast off with Game Shark codes. Yeah. I mean, I don't mind using Game Shark codes, but to that extent, I would never do that again. Yeah. Anyways, doesn't have the job class mechanics that Part 5 did, but still a good game. Most of the party members are good. And unlike Final Fantasy IV, with this game you have the Espers. Well, later you don't have it at this point since this is barely into the playthrough, which add customization that Part 4 never had. Something that I should have mentioned earlier while talking about Part 4, instead of just kind of acting immature and just ripping it, not really saying why I didn't like it. My mistake there, sorry, but yeah. Not only do you get Edward the Bard and Edge the Ninja, but there's really no way to customize those characters other than what weapons you equip them with, whatever weapons the game will allow you to equip them with. Whereas here in this game you have the Espers, so a lot of customization there. Granted, I can't really show that on this file since I ain't even hardly past the beginning tutorials of the game here. One of these days I'll get around to doing a full playthrough of this game for my YouTube channel. Of course, it'll probably be the GBA remake. But again, I don't know. Maybe for this game I will do the SNES original. It's pretty much the same game other than the name slapped at the beginning of it, Final Fantasy VI. Final Fantasy. Other than the name for this game, I think from what I've noticed, it's pretty much the same. I mean, some of the enemy artwork may have been toned down in this version of the game, since it was sanctioned by Nintendo of America back in the day when they used to love doing that kind of thing. I mean, they still do that to some extent today with like Jessica's outfits in Part 8, or Jade's outfits in Dragon Quest 11, or Jade. Let me rephrase that. Jessica's outfits in Dragon Quest 8 and Jade's outfits in Dragon Quest 11 sometimes are still censored for the American releases. So yeah, I guess Nintendo of America still does that kind of thing to some extent. But nowhere near as much as they did back then, at least not that I've noticed. right. We can't go that way. Okay, never mind. Too busy yapping and that's all right. I'm not really going to do a playthrough of this game yet. Eventually I will, but for now, no. Of course, this would be the last game on the SNES, and for the longest time to come. Frick that, this would be the last game on a Nintendo system, period, for a long time to come. Yes. Squaresoft began development of the next game, from what I understand, shortly after this game was released, eager to get the next game going. But, well, up to this point, every Final Fantasy game, even the side games like Legend, Mystic Quest, and what was that other one? Adventure, which was actually part of the Setsu, however, Secret of Mana series. But anyways, all of the Final Fantasy games were on Nintendo systems, whether it was the Nintendo NES, the Super Nintendo, or the Game Boy. Final Fantasy was always Nintendo exclusive until they started work on the game to follow this one, when Nintendo's obsession with cartridges for the next system, the N64, Square took their unfinished game to Sony, who had just recently finished development on their PlayStation. So, yeah, way to go, Nintendo. Of course, the other side of that story, the PlayStation. So Nintendo had originally started working with Sony on a PlayStation, 2 words, PlayStation, CD add-on for the Super Nintendo. But then, through development, got paranoid that Sony would know the inner workings of the SNES and figuratively speaking, flipped Sony the middle finger, and then slowly learned that you don't do that. You don't flip a multi-billion dollar corporation like Sony the middle finger so easily. Sony, feeling humiliated, took the PlayStation, made a few tweaks on it, and released it as an own console, the PlayStation, one word, lumped together. Yeah, flipping the middle finger back at Nintendo for years to come, stealing a lot of their business, Square took Final Fantasy to Sony, Konami took Metal Gear to Sony, NX Dragon Warrior 7, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, all games that were supposed to be on the N64 had they not been cartridge-based. One of the decisions I'm sure Nintendo would like to have to redo over, but yeah. Anyways, as for Squaresoft and Final Fantasy, So with Nintendo's next system being another cartridge-based one, Squaresoft took the yet unfinished Final Fantasy VII to Sony and the PlayStation. And for the next several years, Final Fantasy games were no longer a Nintendo exclusive. And Nintendo lost out on the greatest RPG ever made, in my opinion. Second best video game of all time, period. RPG, platformer, puzzle, whatever. Just second best game of all time, period. Topped only by Ocarina of Time. Final Fantasy VII, a game that I would love to do a playthrough of for my YouTube channel if it weren't for OBS here not capturing the battle screens right. But yeah, the game that popularized RPGs in North America. I mean, Squaresoft had been trying for years with the Final Fantasy games, Secret of Mana, Chrono Trigger, Mario RPG, Legend of the Seven Stars. And while those games were a moderate success for the time, they didn't have the how do you put that, the mainstream crossover success that they had hoped for. Mario RPG came close, but Well, Mario fans didn't really care too much for the RPG elements, and likewise RPG fans didn't really care too much for the Mario part, so it didn't really work as they were hoping. It may have sold well, but I mean, of course, it was a Mario game. Of course it was going to sell well. Not because it was an RPG game, but because it was a Mario game. It's me, Mario! Yeah, that's all you need to know about that one. It didn't sell well because it was an RPG game. It sold well because it was a Mario game. Without the Mario connections, that game probably would have sold half the copies it did. Yeah. Of course, for me personally, this game came out in September of '97. I wasn't going to buy it. It was on a Sony PlayStation. What the heck is a Sony PlayStation? I have a Super Nintendo. I don't even have an N64 yet, you know. But the more I kept hearing about it, the more I kept seeing of it at friends' houses, you know, the more I'm like, oh, God, this game looks so cool. Okay, fine. Yeah. So took my tax return check spring 1998, bought a Sony PlayStation, and this game, yeah, my first 3D game I had ever played. And while this part looks more like a Star Wars intro, wouldn't surprise me to see the Death Star or a zoom-in shot of a Star Destroyer zooming across the screen right about now, but yeah. Yeah. Wow, you can actually see a face. It's not just a mess of 8 or 16-bit pixel sprite. You can actually see fingers. Wow. Yeah. While these graphics are primitive by today's standards, for 1997, 1998, especially for those of us who are accustomed to NES and Super NES graphics, going from that to this, oh my God. Wow. Damn, video game graphics have come a long way. Stuff like that are what I remember thinking as I was watching this for the first time. And again, yes, by today's standards, these graphics are primitive beyond mention. Yes, I would hope so. 25 years later, and good God, it has been 25 years. Where has the time gone? Great, now even that scene cuts out. Here I thought I fixed the settings. Oh, so much for doing a playthrough of this game anytime soon, sadly. As much as I would love to, like I was just saying. Yeah, see? For me, it goes to the battle screen. For anyone watching this video, it's still stuck in the main screen. That's the problem I'm having with trying to capture this for a playthrough series. And why, as much as I would love to do a playthrough of this game, yeah, no way I'm going to do that. Yeah, as much as you get the idea. But anyways, yeah. Graphically ahead of its time, there's no doubt about that. But I still, I still chuckward. Okay, what the hell is a chuckward? I still chuckle inwardly, very loudly and riotously loud when I hear people say that the graphics are what sold the game. Maybe initially to some point, I mean, it sure was, was an awe-inspiring thing for me. Like I was just saying, wow, you can actually see a clear face. It's not just a mess of 8-bit pixel sprites. Yeah, it sure was jaw-dropping for me at the time. But to say that the game only has its impact because of the graphics is complete and utter bullshit. Sorry, excuse my language, but it pisses me off when I hear people say that. That may have been the initial attraction for the game, but the game does not have its legendary status, staple of gaming history, because of its graphics alone. No one would remember the game all these 25 years later if not for the gameplay. Sorry, but no. Graphics got its foot in the door, so to speak, for lack of better terminology. The gameplay kept it there. Okay, what's going on here? Oh, that's right. I mean, there are some things about the game that are a bit annoying, I admit that. Things about any game, no matter how good it is, Ocarina of Time, Breath of the Wild, Dragon Quest XI, this game, Super Metroid. There's things about any video game that can be annoying, no doubt about that. I'm not saying it's a perfect game. There's no such thing as a perfect game, in my opinion. To say that there is fanboy territory. Every game ever made has its annoyances. The abundance of cutscenes, for example, in this game to me is definitely an annoyance. Like I've said in other videos, it's because of this game that I have a strong disliking for cutscenes in video games. At least in games like Breath of the Wild or Dragon Quest XI, you can skip the cutscenes. Thank God. In this game, you cannot. Battle animations, like Knights of the Round. Having to watch that every time you use that can get tedious and annoying. Yes. So again, I'm not saying it's a perfect game. There is no such thing as a perfect, flawless game. But I do believe this is pretty close to it. I mean, I'd have to say a 9, maybe a 9.5 out of 10. Oh, that might be a little overzealous. More like a 9 out of 10 if I'm being completely honest. Of course, there it goes again. What the heck? Didn't do that last time I tried to capture this. I think that I messed with too many of the wrong settings trying to get it to capture right so I can do my playthrough of it. Anyways, yeah. Easily, in my opinion, the best Final Fantasy game, the best RPG game, and the second best game of all time, topped only by Ocarina of Time. And the reason I even bought, the sole solitary one and only reason I even bought a Sony PlayStation back in 1998, or 22 years later, the single solitary one and only reason I bought a Nintendo Switch in 2020, because this game was on both of them. This game doesn't make them. I never buy a Sony PlayStation, and I, as of right now, don't hold this Switch in my hand as I'm talking about it. Yeah. Only difference is, aside from the years, Sony PlayStation, the only other game I ever played other than this was Metal Gear Solid, whereas the Nintendo Switch, more games than I can, well, yeah. More games that I can mention in a short couple minutes that I like on it. Counting remakes, ports, remasters, new games exclusive to it, yeah. The Switch, in other words, was definitely worth the purchase price. Granted, I bought it primarily for Final Fantasy VII. There were so many other good games on it, more than can be said for the Sony PlayStation. Yeah. I regretted buying the Sony PlayStation as soon as I got done playing this game. Well, again, Metal Gear Solid was okay, but I sold the PS1 rather quickly. Or actually, no, again, never mind. Again, the PS2 is the one I sold. The PS1 got wrecked. I don't remember how exactly. I mean, come on, I can't remember every tidbit detail about this stuff all these decades later. I like to think I have a good memory, but not that good. You know, I'm not Dustin Hoffman, and this isn't Rain Man. Yeah. Anyways, would play a little more of the game, but as you've already seen, this isn't capturing right. Heck, it isn't even playing right on my side of this. So, yeah. The next couple Final Fantasy games I never really cared much for. Final Fantasy VIII, released in September of 1999, and Final Fantasy IX in late 2000. In fact, yeah. I don't know. I should go back and play them again, especially since I have both 8 and 9 on my Switch. Bought them the same day I bought the Switch version of this game. Final Fantasy X on the PS2 was okay, but Final Fantasy X-2 on the PS2 is what killed my interest in Final Fantasy games. To this day, I've never played another mainline main series Final Fantasy game ever again. And again, I probably should. You're right. Anybody who would say that is probably right. I probably should. You know, Final Fantasy 12 is on the Switch. The rest of them, I'd need a Sony, you know, PS3 or PS4 to play, but yeah. Yeah, the first 7 games of the Final Fantasy series, except for 4, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, and 7, epic games that I would recommend any RPG fan play. If you can find probably the remakes more than the originals. 4, not so much so, and everything past this point is kind of meh in my opinion. Which is why I still rate the Dragon Quest series ahead of Final Fantasy in terms of best RPG series. Final Fantasy had some good games, but Dragon Quest series, pretty much every game was good. You know, granted I can't speak for 10 since I've never played 10, and I don't have much of a memory of 6, only having played it once. But yeah. Yeah. Probably a kind of backwards video, but that's my thoughts on the Final Fantasy series. Again, I'm not going into detail on games I haven't played, which, you know, Part 11, Part 12, Part 13, 13.2, 13.3, 14, 15. I really don't have any insight to add to those games. I've never played them. Maybe someday when I played them, I'll do a sequel to this video. The second half of the Final Fantasy franchise. But for now, that's about it. And I'm not currently going into much detail on Final Fantasy 8 or 9 or 10 because I don't have any gameplay footage or any way to play those games and capture that. So, yeah. So I respectfully end the video here. Thanks for watching and putting up with my ranting, especially if you like Final Fantasy IV. To hear me constantly rant against it had to be annoying for you. I mean, I had to be honest with these. If I'm just going to say I like the game just because it's popular, then what's the point in even doing these videos? Yeah. Anyway, that about wraps up this video and this series for that matter. I mean, I was thinking about doing one for the Castlevania series, and I might still, I don't know. Or might even do one for the Metal Gear series. As of right now, those are still just thoughts. I might or I might not. We'll see. But for now, anyway, as that's for this video, that's it. Thanks for watching. See ya.